Bully slapped single dad veteran. In a diner, not knowing his son was head of Homeland Security. He thought he was humiliating a broke old man in front of everyone. But seconds later, the room froze when the man's son walked in, carrying a power that could shatter his world. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The morning sun struggled to pierce through the heavy November clouds, casting a gray pallor over Main Street in small-town Ohio. Inside Mel's diner, the familiar scent of coffee and bacon filled the air as waitresses bustled between tables with steaming plates and fresh pots of coffee. Jack Reynolds sat in his usual booth by the window, the worn leather seat carrying the impression of countless mornings spent in quiet contemplation. His weathered hands, marked by decades of hard work, wrapped around a white ceramic mug. Steam rose from the dark coffee as he stirred it slowly, watching the liquid swirl. His old army jacket hung loosely on his frame, the green fabric faded but clean, each crease telling its own story of service and sacrifice. Jack wore it not for attention, but because it was warm and familiar, like an old friend that had been through everything with him. The diner hummed with the usual morning crowd. Sally, the veteran waitress with salt and pepper hair, called out orders while Tom, the short-order cook, worked his magic on the well-seasoned grill. The clink of silverware and murmur of conversation created a comfortable backdrop to Jack's solitary morning ritual. "Well, well, if it ain't the town hero," a loud voice cut through the ambient chatter. Earl Tanner's heavy boots clomped across the linoleum floor, each step deliberate and threatening. He stood at the edge of Jack's booth, his shadow falling across the table like a dark cloud. Jack kept his eyes on his coffee, his expression neutral. He'd learned long ago that some battles weren't worth fighting, especially with men like Earl Tanner. "What's the matter, old-timer? Too good to look at regular folks now?" Earl's voice dripped with mockery. His leather jacket creaked as he leaned closer, the smell of cigarettes and cheap aftershave invading Jack's space. The diner grew quieter. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Conversations died mid-sentence. Everyone knew Earl Tanner's reputation for trouble, and tension crackled in the air like static before a storm. "Just enjoying my coffee, Earl," Jack said quietly, his voice steady and calm. He'd faced worse than Earl Tanner in the jungles of Vietnam. Fear wasn't what kept him seated. It was dignity. Earl's face reddened. "Enjoying your coffee? That's all you ever do, ain't it? Sit here taking up space, wearing that jacket like it means something." He gestured broadly to the other customers. "Hey, everybody. Take a good look at our local hero. Bet he never even saw real action. Probably spent the whole war pushing papers." Jack's hand tightened slightly around his mug, but his face remained composed. The memories of what he'd really seen and done in Vietnam flickered through his mind, memories he'd spent years learning to live with. "You know what I think," Earl continued, his voice getting louder. "I think you're just a washed-up old soldier who can't let go of the past. Sitting here every day like some kind of monument nobody asked for." Sally appeared beside the booth, coffee pot in hand. "Earl, that's enough. Leave him be. Stay out of this," Earl snapped, never taking his eyes off Jack. "Mr. High and Mighty here needs to learn he ain't special just 'cause he wore a uniform." The diner had gone completely silent now. Even the sizzle of the grill seemed muted, as if the whole place was holding its breath. Jack finally looked up, meeting Earl's gaze. There was no anger in his eyes, just a quiet sadness for the hatred he saw in the other man's face. "We all served in our own ways, Earl. There's no shame in that." Something dangerous flashed in Earl's eyes. "Don't you dare try to play wise old man with me!" His hand shot out suddenly, striking Jack across the face with a sharp crack that echoed through the stunned diner. Jack's head jerked to the side, a red mark blooming on his cheek. Coffee sloshed over the rim of his mug, creating dark pools on the worn tabletop. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. The old veteran slowly straightened in his seat. His military training screamed at him to respond, to defend himself. His muscles remembered countless hours of combat training, still ready after all these years. But Jack remained still, letting the sting of the slap fade into a dull throb. Earl stood over him, chest heaving, clearly disappointed by the lack of reaction. "Not so tough now, are you?" He forced a laugh, but uncertainty crept into his voice. He'd expected, maybe even wanted, Jack to fight back. "Get out of my diner!" Sally's voice shook with anger, but Earl was already backing away, trying to salvage his pride with a swagger. "Bunch of losers. Earl spat, pushing his way toward the door. His laughter echoed harsh and hollow as he yanked it open, letting in a blast of cold November air before slamming it behind him. The silence that followed felt heavy enough to crush stone. Jack lowered his eyes back to his coffee, now growing cold in its spilled puddle. The red mark on his cheek stood out against his pale skin, but his expression remained calm, though a deep pain showed in his eyes. No one in the diner moved or spoke. They all watched the old veteran, this man they'd seen every morning for years, sitting alone in his usual booth, dignity intact but heart hurting. The weight of collective shame, for not stepping in, for letting it happen, hung in the air like smoke that wouldn't clear. The only sound was the soft tick of the clock on the wall, counting away seconds that felt like hours, marking time in a moment when time seemed to have lost all meaning. Jack dabbed at the spilled coffee with a napkin, his movements mechanical and distant. Sally approached with a fresh cup and a damp cloth, her eyes brimming with concern. "Jack, I'm so sorry. That man's nothing but poison," she said softly, reaching out to touch his arm. "Let me get you some ice for that cheek." "No need, Sally." Jack managed a small smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Think it's time I headed home anyway." Just as he began gathering himself to leave, the bell above the diner door jingled. A blast of cold November air swept through the restaurant, carrying with it the familiar figure of Michael Reynolds. He stood in the doorway, his broad shoulders filling the frame, a simple brown leather jacket hugging his athletic build. A well-worn suitcase hung from one hand. Michael's eyes quickly scanned the diner, taking in the unusual quiet, the tense atmosphere, and finally landing on his father's reddened cheek. His jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. "Dad? Michael?" Jack's voice carried surprise and a hint of embarrassment. "I thought you were in Washington until next week." Michael crossed the diner in long, purposeful strides. Setting his suitcase down, he placed a firm, reassuring hand on his father's shoulder. The gesture was protective, almost fierce in its gentleness. "Caught an earlier flight," Michael said, his eyes studying the mark on his father's face. "Want to tell me what happened here?" Before Jack could answer, the diner's door swung open again. Earl Tanner stood there, having apparently forgotten something. He froze when he saw Michael standing beside Jack, his swagger faltering for a moment. Michael turned slowly, his hand never leaving his father's shoulder. When he spoke, his voice carried a quiet authority that filled the room. "Mr. Tanner, I presume." Earl's eyes narrowed. "Who wants to know?" "Michael Reynolds," Michael replied evenly. "Jack's son." The name hung in the air. Earl shifted uncomfortably, but tried to maintain his bravado. "Reynolds' kid, huh? The one who ran off to play big shot in Washington?" "The same." Michael's tone remained measured, but there was steel beneath the calm. "I understand you had a disagreement with my father." Earl forced a laugh that sounded hollow. "Disagreement? Just putting an old-timer in his place. Someone's got to do it." "Is that what you call assaulting a veteran?" Michael's words cut through the air like a knife. "A man who served his country with honor." The diner had gone completely still again. Even the coffee pot in Sally's hand stopped mid-pour. Earl's face reddened. "Listen here, you wearing—" "No, Mr. Tanner, you listen." Michael's voice never rose, but it carried the weight of command. "That man you just struck? He taught me that true strength isn't about intimidation. It's about dignity, about standing up for what's right without stooping to violence." Jack watched his son with a mixture of pride and concern. "Michael, it's okay. Let it go." "It's not okay, Dad." Michael squeezed his father's shoulder gently. "But you're right. We won't settle this with more conflict." Earl sneered, though his confidence seemed to be cracking. "What are you going to do about it anyway? Wave some fancy paper at me?" "I don't need to do anything, Mr. Tanner," Michael replied. "Your actions speak for themselves. This town sees you for what you are, a man so afraid of his own insignificance that he has to tear others down to feel powerful." The words landed like physical blows. Earl's face twisted through several emotions: anger, shame, fear, before settling on a mask of contempt. "You Reynolds think you're so much better than everyone else. Both of you can go to hell." He stormed out of the diner again, the door slamming behind him. Through the window, they could see him practically running to his truck, his earlier swagger replaced by retreat. The tension in the diner began to dissolve. Conversations slowly resumed, though many eyes still watched father and son with a mixture of respect and curiosity. "You didn't have to do that," Jack said quietly. Michael finally removed his hand from his father's shoulder, sliding into the booth across from him. "Yes, I did, though I wanted to do a lot more." "Violence wouldn't have solved anything," Jack reminded him. "You taught me that," Michael smiled, "along with everything else important in my life." Sally appeared with a fresh cup of coffee for Michael. "On the house, honey. It's good to see you home." "Thanks, Sally." Michael watched as she walked away, then turned back to his father. "You ready to get out of here?" Jack nodded, reaching for his wallet. "I've got it, Dad." Michael placed a few bills on the table, enough to cover both coffees with a generous tip. They stood together, Michael retrieving his suitcase while Jack straightened his army jacket. The other diners watched as they made their way to the door, father and son walking side by side. At the entrance, Michael glanced at his father, taking in the proud set of his shoulders despite everything that had happened. "Let's go home, Dad." The kitchen in Jack's modest home filled with the comforting aroma of meatloaf and herbs. Michael stood at the counter, sleeves rolled up, mashing potatoes with steady strokes while Jack pulled the meatloaf from the oven. The familiar routine felt like stepping back in time, back to when Michael was just a boy and his mother would orchestrate their family dinners with loving precision. "Still remember how Mom liked her potatoes," Michael said, adding a splash of milk to the bowl. "A little lumpy," she'd say. "Makes them taste more real." Jack nodded, setting the steaming meatloaf on a wooden cutting board. "Your mother never did trust anything too perfect." His voice caught slightly on the word mother, the way it always did. They moved around each other with practiced ease, gathering plates and silverware, filling glasses with ice water. The kitchen was small but tidy, its yellow walls warm in the evening light. Family photos lined the windowsill above the sink, snapshots of happier times, moments frozen in smiles and summer sunshine. When they finally sat down at the small oak table, Jack bowed his head for grace. Michael watched his father's weathered hands clasped together, noticed how they trembled slightly. "Lord, we thank you for this food and for family, for bringing my son home safe. Amen." Jack's prayer was shorter than usual. They began eating in comfortable silence, but Michael could see his father pushing food around his plate more than eating it. Jack's cheek still bore a faint red mark from the morning's incident. "Dad," Michael said gently, "what happened at the diner today? I should have handled it better." Jack set his fork down, his shoulders slumping, sitting there like some helpless old man, letting him... He broke off, shaking his head. "Your mother would have been ashamed." "No," Michael's voice was firm but kind. "Mom would have been proud. It takes more courage not to fight back." "Does it?" Jack looked up, his eyes carrying decades of earned wisdom alongside fresh hurt. "Or does it just make me weak? Times have changed, son. Sometimes I wonder if I've changed with them, or if I'm just..." He gestured vaguely at himself. "This old soldier who doesn't fit anymore." Michael put down his own fork. "You want to know what I see when I look at you, Dad? I see the man who taught me that real strength isn't about throwing punches. It's about standing firm in who you are." Jack managed a small smile. "Your mother used to say something similar. Remember how she'd handle the neighbors when they got too nosy?" Michael chuckled. "Kill 'em with kindness," she'd say, "and then bake them a pie just to prove her point." Jack's eyes softened at the memory. That woman could turn enemies into friends with a single slice of apple pie. They shared a warm look across the table, both remembering the petite but fierce woman who had shaped their lives so profoundly. Sarah Reynolds had been gone for 5 years now, but her presence still filled the house like a gentle echo. "She'd have known exactly what to do today," Jack said quietly. "She did know, Dad. She taught us both." Michael reached across the table and squeezed his father's shoulder. "Violence wasn't the answer then, and it isn't now." Jack nodded slowly, some of the tension leaving his face. He took a real bite of his meatloaf, then another. "You know, this isn't half bad for a city boy." "Mom's recipe," Michael said with a grin. "I paid attention sometimes." They finished their meal trading memories, about Sarah's famous Sunday dinners, about the time she caught them having a water balloon fight in the living room, about her uncanny ability to know when either of them needed a hug before they knew it themselves. After dinner, they cleaned up together, Michael washing while Jack dried, the way they had thousands of times before. The familiar rhythm of plates clinking and water running filled the kitchen with comfortable sounds. When the last dish was put away, Michael stepped out onto the back porch. The night was clear and cold. Stars scattered across the black Ohio sky like diamonds on velvet. He could see his breath in the chilly air. Looking up at those eternal lights, Michael closed his eyes. "Lord," he whispered, "help me know the right way to handle this. Give me the wisdom to protect Dad's dignity and the strength to do it with grace." He stood there for a moment longer, letting the peace of the night settle around him, before heading back inside to bed. The morning sun cast long shadows across Main Street as Jack Reynolds walked toward Hanson's Hardware. His worn work boots clicked against the sidewalk, each step measured and purposeful. The crisp November air bit at his cheeks, and he tugged his army jacket closer around his shoulders. The brass bell above the door chimed as he entered. Warm air wrapped around him, carrying the familiar scent of sawdust and metal. Jack nodded to old Bill Hanson behind the counter. But Bill quickly looked away, suddenly very interested in organizing a display of screwdrivers. As Jack made his way down the plumbing aisle, voices drifted from the next row over. He recognized them: Tom Watson from the bank, and Sarah Miller, who ran the flower shop. "Did you hear what Earl said about Jack Reynolds?" Sarah's whisper carried clearly. "Said he froze up in Vietnam. Let his whole unit down." "Makes sense now, doesn't it?" Tom replied. The way he just sat there in the diner yesterday, no fight in him at all. Jack's hand trembled as he reached for a pipe fitting. The metal piece clattered to the floor, and the whispers stopped abruptly. He heard hurried footsteps moving away. The items in his basket felt like lead weights as he approached the counter. Bill rang up his purchase without meeting his eyes, speaking in clipped sentences about the total and his change. Jack's "thank you" went unanswered. Outside, the morning had grown colder. Or maybe it was just him. Mrs. Chen, who usually waved cheerfully from her dress shop window, quickly pulled down her shade when she saw him. Two men talking outside the post office fell silent as he passed, their eyes following him with judgment. These were people he'd known for decades, people whose children he'd watched grow up, people he'd helped during storms and hard times. Now they looked at him like he was a stranger. No, worse than a stranger, like he was something shameful. Jack's pace quickened as he neared home, his purchases rattling in the paper bag. His throat felt tight, and his eyes stung. Not from emotion, he told himself. Just the wind. Michael was on the front porch when Jack arrived, reading the morning paper. One look at his father's face told him everything he needed to know. He folded the paper and stood up. "Come inside, Dad. I'll make us some coffee." In the kitchen, Jack's hands shook as he set down the hardware store bag. Michael watched his father sink heavily into a chair at the small kitchen table. "Earl's been talking," Jack said quietly. "Spreading lies about Vietnam." Michael's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. "What kind of lies?" "That I'm a coward, that I let my unit down." Jack's voice cracked slightly. "Those people in town, people I've known my whole life, they're believing him." Michael poured 2 cups of coffee and sat across from his father. "They're wrong, Dad. We both know that. Your service record—" "My service record doesn't matter if no one believes it," Jack interrupted, his words heavy with hurt. 40 years in this town, 40 years of trying to live right, to help where I could. And it all comes apart because of one bitter man's lies. "Then we'll fight it," Michael said firmly. "Not with fists or threats, but with truth. With dignity. The same way you've lived your whole life." He reached across the table and gripped his father's shoulder. "Don't give up, Dad. Don't let him win." Jack managed a small nod, but his eyes remained distant. They sat in silence as the afternoon light faded into evening. Michael tried to get his father to eat dinner, but Jack just picked at his food before excusing himself to his chair in the living room. The familiar leather armchair creaked as Jack settled into it, his old Bible open in his lap. The worn pages fell open to Psalms, his fingers tracing the familiar verses about persecution and righteousness. The table lamp cast a warm circle around him, a small comfort against the growing darkness outside. The crash came without warning. Glass shattered, and something thudded against the floor. Jack jumped up, the Bible falling from his lap. Michael rushed in from the kitchen. There on the floor lay a rock wrapped in paper. Jack's hands trembled as he picked it up and unfolded the note. One word was scrawled in angry black letters: Lear. Wind whistled through the broken window as father and son stared at the cruel message, the single word seeming to mock everything Jack had ever stood for. Michael stood in his father's living room, hands tucked in his pockets as he watched Jack polish his old dress shoes. "Dad, you can't hide away forever. The community center potluck is tonight. Everyone's going to be there. Jack's polishing cloth moved in slow, steady circles. Not everyone, son. Some folks made their feelings pretty clear yesterday. That's exactly why we should go. Michael sat on the armrest of his father's favorite chair. Show them who you really are, not who Earl says you are. Jack's hands stilled. The late afternoon light streaming through the window caught the silver in his hair. I don't know, Michael. Maybe it's better to let things settle down first. Remember what Mom always said about these potlucks? Michael's voice softened. She'd say they were like medicine for a hurting heart. Jack's eyes grew distant, a small smile touching his lips. Sarah never missed one. Always made her famous apple pie. I saw Mrs. Thompson at the grocery store earlier. She's making apple pie tonight. Michael stood and extended his hand. Come on, Dad, let's get cleaned up. An hour later, they walked through the community center's double doors. The large room buzzed with conversation and the clinking of dishes. Folding tables lined the walls, laden with casseroles, salads, and desserts. Some people noticed their entrance, conversations faltering briefly before resuming in hushed tones. Jack carried his contribution, a modest plate of deviled eggs, toward the food table. As he set it down, he heard a commotion from the hallway leading to the bathrooms. Michael had gotten pulled into a conversation with the mayor, so Jack went to investigate. 3 teenage boys had cornered a younger black boy against the wall. The boy clutched his backpack to his chest, his eyes wide with fear but also determination. Hey there, Jack said quietly, his voice carrying the calm authority earned from years of military service. The bullies turned, startled. Everything all right? We're just talking, one of them said, puffing up his chest. Mind if I join the conversation? Jack stepped closer, positioning himself slightly between them and their target. I always enjoy good company. The boys shuffled their feet, exchanging glances. After a moment, they muttered excuses and walked away. Jack turned to the younger boy, who still gripped his backpack tightly. You okay, son? Yes, sir. The boy's shoulders slowly relaxed. I'm Deshaun Miller. Jack Reynolds. He gestured toward the main room. Would you like to join me for some of that apple pie I saw on the dessert table? Deshaun hesitated, then nodded. They found a quiet corner with 2 empty chairs. Jack noticed the boy's worn sneakers and the careful way he handled his paper plate, making sure not to waste a single bite. You like school, Deshaun? Yes, sir, especially science. But, Deshaun pushed his pie around the plate. Sometimes it's hard to focus. Those guys, they're always making it difficult? Jack suggested gently. Deshaun nodded. My mom works 2 jobs. She says I need to study hard, make something of myself. But those guys, he straightened his shoulders. I want to fight back sometimes. I understand that feeling. Jack's voice remained steady. But you know what takes more courage than fighting? Deshaun looked up, curious. Standing tall, being better than they expect, proving them wrong with your actions, not your fists. Jack leaned forward slightly. In Vietnam, I learned that the strongest soldiers weren't always the ones who fought the most battles. Sometimes they were the ones who kept their dignity when others tried to take it away. Like you did yesterday? At the diner? Deshaun asked quietly. Everyone's talking about it. Jack's eyes widened slightly, surprised. You heard about that? Yes, sir. My mom was there, she said. Deshaun paused, choosing his words carefully. She said you showed real strength by not hitting back. A warm feeling spread through Jack's chest, replacing some of the heaviness he'd been carrying. Your mother sounds like a wise woman. They talked for nearly an hour, Jack sharing stories about his time in the service, carefully chosen to emphasize courage, honor, and standing up for what's right. Deshaun soaked up every word, asking thoughtful questions that revealed his sharp mind. As the evening wound down, Michael found them. Ready to head home, Dad? Jack nodded, standing slowly. He placed a gentle hand on Deshaun's shoulder. You take care, son. They walked toward the exit, the cool night air greeting them as they stepped outside. Quick footsteps sounded behind them. Mr. Reynolds. Deshaun jogged up, slightly out of breath. Would it be okay if I came to visit you sometime? Jack felt something warm bloom in his chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long while. His lips curved into a small but genuine smile. I'd like that, Deshaun. I'd like that very much. Earl Tanner paced back and forth at Miller's bar, his face red with anger as he nursed his third beer. The afternoon sun filtered through dusty windows, casting long shadows across the worn wooden floor. 5 of his regular drinking buddies huddled around him, hanging on his every word. "You know what I heard?" Earl's voice dripped with venom. "That Jack Reynolds? His whole military story is a lie." He leaned in closer, lowering his voice for effect. "Word is, he got kicked out. Dishonorably discharged." The men exchanged worried glances. Tom Miller, the oldest of the group, furrowed his brow. "That's a mighty serious accusation, Earl. Jack's been here longer than most of us. Think about it." Earl pressed on, tapping his finger on the bar. "Have you ever seen his medals, his papers? Man walks around in that old jacket like he's some kind of hero. But where's the proof?" The poison spread quickly through their small Ohio town. By nightfall, whispers echoed down Main Street like autumn leaves skittering across pavement. At the grocery store, Margaret Wilson pulled her cart away when she saw Jack coming down the aisle. At the post office, people who'd known him for decades suddenly found the floor fascinating when he walked by. The next morning, Jack pushed open the door to Henderson's Hardware, the little bell chiming overhead. The usual warm greeting from Bill Henderson never came. Instead, the stocky shop owner stood rigid behind the counter, arms crossed. "We're closed," Bill announced, though the open sign clearly glowed in the window. Jack stood there, confusion etching deeper lines in his weathered face. "Bill, I just need some wood screws for..." "I said we're closed." Bill's voice was cold as January frost. "To you, anyway. Don't need your kind in here." Jack's shoulders slumped slightly, but his spine stayed straight as he turned and walked out. Through the window, he could see Bill immediately helping another customer. At home, Michael paced the kitchen, his usual composed demeanor cracking. "This is ridiculous, Dad. I could make one phone call and..." "No." Jack's voice was quiet but firm as he sat at the kitchen table. "Using your position would only prove Earl right, that we can't stand on our own truth." Michael ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "Then let me at least pull your service records. Show everyone. The truth isn't always about papers and proof, son." Jack's eyes held a distant look. "It's about standing firm when the winds blow hardest." But the winds kept blowing. At church on Sunday, the pew around Jack sat empty, though the rest of the building was full. At the diner, his usual booth was suddenly reserved. Even the teenage boy who mowed his lawn stopped showing up. One evening, Jack sat in his living room, watching shadows lengthen across the wall. The phone rang, the third hang-up call that day. Michael walked in from the kitchen, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Deshaun stopped by earlier," Michael said softly, setting a mug in front of his father. "He wanted to come in, but his mother pulled him away. Said something about not wanting trouble." Jack nodded slowly, his calloused fingers wrapping around the warm cup. "Can't blame her. A mother protecting her son." Michael sat down heavily. "This isn't right, Dad. These people, they've known you for years. How can they just..." "Fear's a powerful thing, son." Jack took a slow sip of coffee. "Makes people forget what they know in their hearts to be true." Through the window, they could see Mrs. Patterson hurrying past on her evening walk. When Jack raised his hand to wave, she quickly crossed to the other side of the street. "We fight this with truth," Michael said firmly, though his voice held a tremor of frustration. "Not with anger, not with force, but with dignity. The same way you faced everything else in your life." Jack stood slowly, walking to the old oak cabinet in the corner. He pulled out a small wooden box, its surface smooth from years of handling. Sitting back at the kitchen table, he opened it carefully. Inside lay his medals, the bronze star gleaming dully in the fading light, combat ribbons carefully preserved, his honorable discharge papers yellowed but intact, memories of sacrifice, courage, and loss, all contained in this simple box. "Sometimes I wonder," Jack said softly, touching the bronze star with one finger, "if any of it matters anymore. If what we did over there, what we stood for." His voice trailed off as he stared at the symbols of his service, his honor, his truth. Michael watched his father, seeing not just the proud veteran, but also the man who had raised him alone after his mother died, who had taught him about integrity, about standing tall when life tried to bend you down. The kitchen clock ticked steadily in the silence as father and son sat together. the metals between them telling their own quiet story of truth, waiting to be heard. The morning sun barely peeked through heavy clouds as Michael stood in his father's kitchen pouring 2 steaming cups of coffee. Jack sat at the small round table, absently thumbing through yesterday's newspaper. The headlines seemed to mock him, full of stories about community and connection, things that felt far away right now. "Dad," Michael said, setting down a coffee mug decorated with faded American flags. "Pastor Hayes is organizing a food drive at the church today. I thought maybe we could help out." Jack's weathered hands tightened around the newspaper. "Don't know if that's such a good idea, son. People aren't exactly welcoming these days." Michael pulled out a chair and sat down, his expression gentle but firm. "That's exactly why we should go. Show them who you really are, not who Earl says you are." Jack took a slow sip of coffee, wincing slightly at the heat. The familiar bitter taste grounded him, reminded him of countless mornings spent gathering courage. The last thing folks need is more drama at a church event. They need to see the real you, Dad. The man who taught me that service isn't about recognition. It's about doing what's right. Michael reached across the table, placing his hand on his father's arm. "Remember what you always told me? The truth shows itself in actions, not words." Jack's eyes softened at the memory. He'd said those words so many times when Michael was growing up, usually while they were helping elderly Mrs. Peterson with her yard work, or fixing Widow Johnson's fence. Now his own words challenged him. "All right," Jack conceded, setting down his coffee. "But we keep it low-key." An hour later, they pulled into the church parking lot in Jack's old pickup truck. The lot was already busy, with volunteers unloading boxes of canned goods and setting up folding tables. Jack's stomach tightened as he noticed a few people glancing their way, whispering to each other. Pastor Hayes spotted them and walked over, his warm smile genuine. "Jack, Michael, we could really use some strong backs today." He gestured to a stack of heavy boxes. "Got quite a turnout of families needing help this month." Jack nodded, grateful for the pastor's matter-of-fact welcome. Without a word, he rolled up his sleeves and got to work. The familiar rhythm of physical labor helped ease his tension. Box after box, he and Michael formed an efficient team, creating neat rows of supplies on the tables. Children darted between the tables, some helping, others just playing. A little girl with pigtails dropped her armload of cans, sending them rolling across the parking lot. Before anyone could react, Jack was already there, helping her gather them up. "Don't worry about it, sweetheart," he said softly, steadying a can of green beans in her small hands. "Sometimes we all drop things." The girl giggled, and soon other children gravitated toward Jack. He showed them how to stack cans in pyramid shapes, making a game of it. Their laughter drew attention, and Jack could feel eyes on him. But this time, the stares felt different. Mrs. Thompson, who'd turned away from him at the grocery store just yesterday, paused while sorting donations. She watched as Jack patiently helped a young boy tie his loose shoelace, the same gentle patience he'd shown years ago when teaching scout troops how to fold the American flag. The morning wore on, and Jack found himself relaxing despite himself. He shared a joke with Mr. Garcia while moving tables, helped old Mrs. Wilson find the sugar-free items she needed for her diabetes. Each small interaction felt like a tiny bridge being rebuilt. Deshaun showed up around noon, eager to help. Jack put him in charge of organizing the bread table, and the teenager took to the responsibility with pride. "You're good at this," Jack told him, and Deshaun's answering smile lit up his whole face. Michael worked nearby, efficiently directing traffic flow and solving logistical problems. Every so often, he'd catch his father's eye and give a small nod of encouragement. Jack realized that while some people still avoided him, others were beginning to remember the man they'd known for decades, the one who showed up when neighbors needed help, who never sought praise or recognition. As the afternoon wound down, Jack helped break down the empty boxes and load them for recycling. His back ached, but it was the good kind of tired that comes from honest work. He noticed Pastor Hayes watching him from the church steps. "Thank you for coming today, Jack," the pastor said, walking over to where Jack was tying up the last bundle of cardboard. "Your service means a lot to this community. Not just today, but always." The simple words hit Jack like a sudden warm breeze on a cold day. He ducked his head, not trusting himself to speak for a moment. When he finally looked up, he saw nothing but sincerity in the pastor's eyes. "Just doing what needs doing," Jack managed to say. Pastor Hayes smiled. "That's exactly what I mean." He squeezed Jack's shoulder before heading back inside. Jack stood there for a moment, letting the pastor's words sink in. The wall of isolation that had been building around him didn't exactly crumble, but maybe, just maybe, a few bricks had started to come loose. Michael appeared at his side, car keys in hand. "Ready to head home, Dad?" Jack nodded, taking one last look at the church grounds. A few volunteers waved goodbye. Deshawn called out, "See you next time, Mr. Reynolds." The simple normalcy of it all felt like a gift. As they walked to the truck, Jack felt something shift inside him. Not a full return of his old confidence, but a quiet reminder that truth had its own way of speaking. Sometimes it spoke through stacked cans, tied shoelaces, and the simple act of showing up to help. For the first time in days, hope didn't feel quite so far away. The rhythmic scraping of rake against earth filled Jack's front yard as Deshawn gathered fallen leaves into neat piles. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of wood smoke from nearby chimneys. Jack sat on his porch steps, watching the teenager work with careful attention to detail, just as Jack had shown him. "You're doing a fine job there, son," Jack called out, his voice warm with approval. "Nice, even strokes." Deshawn paused, wiping his brow with his sleeve. "Thanks, Mr. Reynolds. My mom says the yard's never looked better since I started helping you." "Your mom is right about that." Jack gestured to the spot beside him. "Take a break. Come sit for a spell." Deshawn propped the rake against the old maple tree and joined Jack on the steps. The wooden boards creaked softly beneath them. Jack reached into a small cooler and handed Deshawn a cold bottle of root beer, their usual afternoon ritual. "Got trouble with those boys at school again?" Jack asked, noticing the way Deshawn's shoulders tensed slightly. "Yeah." Deshawn studied the bottle in his hands. "They've been worse lately, making fun of me for hanging out here, saying mean stuff about both of us." Jack nodded slowly, his eyes distant. "Reminds me of my time in Vietnam. Had a fellow in my unit. Rogers was his name. Others gave him a hard time 'cause he was different. Quiet type. Liked to read poetry. What happened to him? Saved my life. That's what happened." Jack's voice grew soft with memory. "We were pinned down, taking heavy fire. Rogers pulled me to safety when I got hit. The ones who'd laughed at him? They stopped laughing that day." Deshawn listened intently, hanging on every word. "Did you want to fight back? Against the ones who were mean to him?" "Course I did. But Rogers taught me something important. Fighting back doesn't always mean using your fists. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stay steady, keep your dignity." Jack turned to face Deshawn fully. "Your worth isn't measured by what bullies say about you. It's measured by what's in here." He tapped his chest gently. A neighbor across the street paused while watering her flowers, watching them with curious eyes. Jack gave her a friendly wave, and after a moment's hesitation she waved back. "Mr. Reynolds?" Deshawn's voice was thoughtful. "How do you stay so calm when people are being mean to you? Like what happened at the diner?" Jack was quiet for a moment, considering. "Well, it's like training a muscle. Takes practice. Start with your breathing. In through your nose, out through your mouth. When someone's trying to get under your skin, focus on your breath instead of their words." Deshawn tried it, taking a deep breath. "Like this? That's it, exactly." Jack smiled. "Now, stand up straight. Let's work on your posture." They both stood, and Jack gently adjusted Deshawn's shoulders. "Head high, shoulders back. Doesn't matter if you're scared inside. When you carry yourself with respect, others start to notice." More neighbors had stopped to watch them now, some pretending to check their mail or trim their hedges. The sight of the elderly white veteran and young black teenager practicing proper posture together made a few of them pause, reconsider their assumptions. "You know what my drill sergeant used to say?" Jack demonstrated the stance himself, his military bearing still evident after all these years. "Your uniform isn't just what you wear, it's how you carry yourself." Deshawn mimicked Jack's pose, standing tall. "Like this? Perfect." Jack beamed with pride. "Now let's hear about that math test you were worried about." They settled back onto the porch steps, and Deshawn's face lit up. "I got a B+! I used those study tricks you showed me, breaking down the problems into smaller parts, just like you said about tackling big jobs in the yard." "That's wonderful news." Jack's enthusiasm was genuine. "See what happens when you apply yourself? Nothing can stop you when you put your mind to it. They continued talking as the afternoon sun began its descent, their laughter carrying across the yard. Deshaun shared stories about school, his dreams of college, his worry about his mom working so hard. Jack listened attentively, offering gentle guidance and encouragement. The screen door creaked, and Michael stepped out onto the porch, holding his phone. He'd been watching them through the window, moved by the natural bond between his father and Deshaun. "Hold that pose, you two," Michael said, raising his phone. Jack and Deshaun were still chuckling about a joke they'd shared, their faces bright with genuine joy. The moment captured something pure. Two generations bridging divides, finding common ground in simple friendship. "This is the real story people need to see," Michael said, looking at the photo he'd just taken. The image showed Jack and Deshaun caught in mid-laugh, the autumn leaves creating a perfect backdrop, their body language completely at ease with each other. The town hall stood like a stern old judge against the darkening evening sky, its white columns gleaming under newly installed floodlights. Cars filled the parking lot as people filed in, their faces a mix of curiosity and concern. Jack Reynolds sat in his truck, hands gripping the steering wheel, watching families make their way up the broad stone steps. "You don't have to do this, Dad," Michael said from the passenger seat. He wore a simple blue sweater tonight, looking more like a small-town son than a Washington official. Jack adjusted his tie, the same one he'd worn to his wife's funeral. "Yes, I do." His voice was quiet but firm. "Some things are worth standing up for." Inside, the meeting room hummed with whispered conversations. Old wooden chairs creaked under the weight of concerned citizens. The mayor, a round-faced woman in her 50s, stood at the podium discussing the unfortunate divisions that had emerged in their community. Jack sat in the third row, his weathered hands folded in his lap. He could feel stares boring into him from all directions. Some friendly, some uncertain, some hostile. Deshaun and his mother sat 2 rows behind him, offering silent support. When the mayor opened the floor for comments, Jack slowly rose. His joints protested, the same joints that had carried him through rice paddies half a century ago. The walk to the podium felt longer than any patrol he'd ever done. Standing at the microphone, Jack looked out over the sea of familiar faces. Earl Tanner leaned against the back wall, arms crossed, a smirk playing at his lips. But Jack didn't focus on him. Instead, his eyes found the old flag hanging in the corner, its stars and stripes as meaningful now as they'd been in his youth. "Most of you have known me for decades," Jack began, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "You've seen me at the diner every morning, nodding hello across Main Street, sitting next to you in church." He paused, letting his words settle. "But I realize now that maybe you don't really know me at all." The room grew still. Even the usual shuffling of feet and clearing of throats ceased. "In 1968, I was just a kid from Ohio who believed in something bigger than myself. I believed in honor, in duty, in protecting those who couldn't protect themselves." Jack's hands rested lightly on the podium. "In Vietnam, I learned what those words really meant." He described a night in the jungle when his unit came under fire, how he'd carried a wounded buddy through monsoon rains, both of them covered in mud and blood. How he'd learned that real courage wasn't about being fearless, it was about being terrified but doing what needed to be done anyway. "I didn't come home expecting parades," Jack continued, his voice growing softer. "I came home wanting only to live a quiet life, to raise my son, to be a good neighbor, to honor the memory of those who didn't make it back by living a life worthy of their sacrifice." Several veterans in the audience nodded slowly, understanding in their eyes. A woman in the front row dabbed at her tears with a tissue. "These past weeks, I've been called a coward, a liar, a fraud." Jack's words carried no bitterness, only sadness. "But the real courage I learned in Vietnam wasn't about hitting back when someone strikes you. It's about standing firm in who you are, even when others try to tear you down." He glanced at Deshaun, whose young face shone with admiration. "It's about showing the next generation that strength doesn't come from making others feel small. It comes from lifting them up, from choosing dignity over revenge, from believing in something greater than our own pride." The silence in the room was complete now. Even Earl's smirk had faded. "I've watched this town, my home, begin to divide itself. Neighbor turning against neighbor. Old friendships crumbling under the weight of rumors and fear." Jack straightened his shoulders. "But that's not who we are. We're better than that. We're stronger than that." His voice grew stronger, filled with quiet conviction. I fought for a country where we don't have to agree on everything, but where we respect each other's humanity, where we judge people by their actions, not by whispered accusations, where we remember that what unites us is far greater than what divides us. Tears glistened in several eyes now. An older woman who'd recently crossed the street to avoid Jack was openly weeping. "I'm not asking for sympathy or special treatment," Jack concluded. "I'm asking only that we remember who we are, not just as a town, but as Americans. That we choose to be our best selves, not our worst. That we stand together not because we're perfect, but because we're family." For a moment, no one moved. Then, from somewhere in the middle of the room, someone began to clap. The applause spread like a wave, building until it filled the entire hall. People rose to their feet, their faces transformed by emotion and understanding. Michael, still seated in the third row, squeezed his father's shoulder as Jack returned to his seat. Pride shone in his eyes, and in that moment, Jack felt the weight of the past weeks begin to lift. He wasn't just a man who'd been slapped in a diner anymore. He was Jack Reynolds, veteran, father, neighbor. A man who had found his voice and used it not for revenge but for healing. The applause continued, washing over him like a cleansing rain. For the first time in weeks, Jack felt truly seen, truly understood. Not as a symbol or a target, but as himself. A man who had lived by his principles, even when it would have been easier not to. The morning sun cast long shadows across Jack's front lawn as he stepped out to collect his mail. His boots crunched on frost-covered grass, and his breath made little clouds in the crisp air. After the success of the town hall meeting, he felt lighter than he had in weeks. But something fluttering on the telephone pole caught his eye. A bright orange flyer stood out against the weathered wood. Jack squinted, moving closer to read it. His heart dropped like a stone. "Fraud in our midst," the headline screamed in bold letters. Below it, what looked like official military documents showed a dishonorable discharge with his name on it. Jack's hands trembled as he ripped the paper down. More flyers decorated poles and store windows along Main Street. Each one felt like a fresh slap across his face. People hurried past him, averting their eyes. Mrs. Henderson, who'd hugged him after his speech just days ago, crossed the street to avoid him. At Pete's Hardware, where he'd been buying supplies since before Michael was born, the bell above the door jangled cheerfully. But Pete's welcome was anything but warm. "We reserve the right to refuse service," Pete said stiffly, not meeting Jack's eyes. "I think it's best if you shop elsewhere." Jack's throat tightened. "Pete, we've known each other 30 years. You know these papers are lies." "Do I?" Pete's voice was hard. "Those look like official documents to me. Got all the right stamps and everything." Back home, Jack found Michael in the kitchen, his phone pressed to his ear, tension visible in his shoulders. "Yes, sir. I understand the sensitivity." "No, sir, I assure you my father's record is clean." Michael's voice carried the strain of a man walking a tightrope. Jack's stomach churned. His son's prestigious position, everything he'd worked for, was being threatened because of him. He sank into a kitchen chair, the weight of shame pressing down on his shoulders. Michael ended the call and rubbed his temples. "That was my supervisor in Washington. These rumors are reaching high places, Dad." "I'm so sorry, son," Jack whispered. "Your career." "Stop that right now," Michael said firmly. "My career isn't more important than the truth." But the truth felt fragile now, like autumn leaves scattered by a cruel wind. Jack pulled out his real discharge papers from the drawer where he kept them. The honorable discharge, the Bronze Star citation. They looked almost identical to the forged ones plastered around town. The phone rang again. This time it was the pastor, regretfully asking Jack to step down from his volunteer position at the food bank. "Just until this is cleared up," he said apologetically. "We have to think of the church's reputation." By afternoon, even the diner, his sanctuary for decades, had turned hostile. The waitress who'd served him coffee every morning for 15 years placed a reserved sign on his usual booth when she saw him coming. Deshaun tried to visit, but his mother pulled him away by the arm. "I'm sorry, Mr. Reynolds," she said, not unkindly, "but I have to protect my boy." Jack watched them go, remembering how Deshaun's trust had given him hope. Now, that too was taken away. Michael spent hours making calls, trying to get official copies of Jack's records. But government bureaucracy moved slowly, and the damage spread quickly. Social media amplified the lies. Local news outlets picked up the story. "We'll fight this," Michael insisted over dinner, which neither of them touched. Truth always comes out. But Jack saw the dark circles under his son's eyes, heard the strain in his voice. Michael's own reputation was being questioned now. How could the head of Homeland Security be trusted if his own father had lied about his service? Evening settled over the house like a heavy blanket. Michael finally went to bed, his footsteps heavy on the stairs. Jack sat alone in his chair, staring at the wall where his wife's picture hung. Mary's smile seemed sadder tonight, her eyes full of concern. The room felt too quiet, too empty. Jack's fingers traced the worn edges of his real Bronze Star citation. The paper felt thin, inadequate against the weight of lies crushing down on him. His bedroom offered no comfort. Jack lay on top of the covers, still fully dressed. Moonlight filtered through the curtains, casting strange shadows. Mary's picture on the nightstand watched over him, just as she had every night since her passing. "Maybe I was wrong to hope," he whispered to her image, his voice breaking in the darkness. The clock ticked steadily, counting out lonely seconds. Outside, a car drove past, its headlights sweeping across the ceiling. Jack watched them move, remembering other nights when hope had seemed distant, in the jungles of Vietnam, at Mary's funeral, during Michael's dangerous assignments. But this felt different. Those trials had tested his strength. This attacked his very identity, the core of who he was. It threatened not just him, but his son's future too. Jack turned toward Mary's picture. The moonlight caught the glass, making it hard to see her face clearly. His whispered words hung in the still air, a prayer with no answer. As exhaustion finally pulled him into uneasy sleep, Jack Reynolds stared out his living room window, watching fallen leaves dance across his front yard. The curtains were drawn, casting shadows across his weathered face. 3 days had passed since Earl's fake documents appeared around town, and Jack hadn't stepped outside once. "Dad, you need to eat something," Michael said from the kitchen doorway, holding a plate with scrambled eggs and toast. The smell of coffee filled the air, but Jack showed no interest. "Not hungry," Jack muttered, his voice hollow. The morning paper lay untouched on the coffee table, its headlines face down. He couldn't bear to see if there were any more stories about him. Michael set the plate down and pulled up a chair beside his father. "Pastor Dave called again. He's worried about you missing Sunday service." Jack's shoulders slumped further. "Can't face them, son. Not after." His voice trailed off as he remembered the whispers, the sideways glances, the way people stepped back when he walked past. "Deshaun stopped by yesterday," Michael continued gently. "That boy looks up to you, Dad. He needs you." Jack's eyes grew moist. "What can I teach him now? How to be a fraud?" His fingers traced the window pane, following a raindrop's path. "Maybe I should have fought back that day in the diner. Maybe Earl was right about me being weak." Michael's jaw tightened. He pulled out his phone, thumb hovering over a contact labeled Director of Veterans Affairs. One call could start an investigation into Earl's past, expose his lies, maybe even lead to charges for document forgery. As head of Homeland Security, he had the power to make Earl's life very uncomfortable. "I could end this, Dad," Michael said quietly. "One phone call. That's all it would take." Jack turned to his son, really looking at him for the first time that morning. "No," he said firmly. "That's not who we are. That's not who I raised you to be." Michael stood up and paced the worn carpet. "Then what? Watch while that snake Earl destroys everything you've built? Your reputation? Your friendships?" He ran his hands through his hair in frustration. "I have the authority to help, Dad. Why won't you let me use it?" "Because power without integrity is just bullying with a badge," Jack replied softly. "Your mother taught us that." The mention of his mother made Michael pause. He glanced at her photo on the mantel, her warm smile frozen in time. "She'd know what to do," he whispered. Jack nodded, a tear finally escaping down his cheek. "She always did." The days blurred together. Jack stopped trimming his lawn, letting the grass grow wild. His army jacket hung untouched in the closet. The diner's morning coffee grew cold without him. Even his Bible gathered dust on the nightstand. One evening, Michael found his father in the garage, surrounded by old boxes. Jack sat on a wooden stool, holding something in his lap. "Dad?" Michael called softly. Jack didn't look up. In his hands lay a Bronze Star medal, its surface dulled with age. "Remember when I got this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Michael knelt beside him. "Mom polished it every year on Veterans Day. Said it needed to shine like your heart did." Jack's fingers traced the metal's edges. "Saved 3 men that day in Vietnam, under heavy fire. Didn't think about medals or honor. Just knew I had to get them home." He looked up at Michael, his eyes filled with pain. "Now the whole town thinks I'm a coward, a liar. That medal tells the truth, Dad. Earl's lies can't change what you did. Can't they?" Jack's voice cracked. 30 years of living here. Thought these people knew me, trusted me. He set the medal down carefully. "Now I wonder if any of it meant anything at all." Michael watched helplessly as his father shuffled back into the house. The garage light cast long shadows, and the metal gleamed faintly in the darkness. Through the window, he could see Jack settle into his armchair, alone in the unlit living room. Jack picked up his old Bible, but didn't open it. His fingers just rested on its worn cover as he stared into the darkness. What if it all meant nothing? He whispered to the empty room, his words heavy with doubt and despair. The house creaked around him, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. But Jack remained motionless, lost in the shadows of his thoughts. The Bronze Star medal forgotten in the garage, a silent witness to valor that now seemed as distant as the war itself. Michael stood in the kitchen doorway, watching his father's silhouette. His phone felt heavy in his pocket, filled with numbers he could call, favors he could ask. But his father's words about integrity echoed in his mind, leaving him torn between duty and principle, between power and righteousness. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked steadily, counting down moments in a house grown too quiet, too dark, too heavy with unspoken pain. Jack's whispered question hung in the air, unanswered, as father and son remained separated by shadows and silence, each wrestling with their own version of right and wrong. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through Jack's living room windows. He sat in his old armchair, a cold cup of coffee forgotten on the side table. The television droned quietly in the background, but his eyes were fixed on nothing in particular. A gentle knock at the front door broke the silence. Jack didn't move, hoping whoever it was would go away. The knock came again, more insistent this time. "Mr. Reynolds?" Deshawn's young voice carried through the door. "It's me. Please open up." Jack's shoulders sagged. He couldn't ignore the boy who'd become such a bright spot in his life. With effort, he pushed himself up from the chair and shuffled to the door, his joints stiff from days of inactivity. When he opened it, Deshawn stood on the porch, clutching a piece of paper in his hands. The 14-year-old's dark eyes were filled with determination, though his fingers fidgeted nervously with the paper's corners. "I wrote something," Deshawn said quietly. "Would you read it?" Jack stepped aside, letting the boy enter. They settled in the living room, Deshawn perching on the edge of the couch while Jack eased back into his armchair. "Go ahead," Deshawn urged, holding out the lined paper. "Read it out loud, please." Jack took the letter, noting Deshawn's careful handwriting. He cleared his throat and began to read. "Dear Mr. Reynolds, I know people are saying mean things about you, but I want you to know what you mean to me. Before I met you, I was ready to quit school. The kids who bullied me made me feel worthless, like I didn't belong anywhere. But then I saw how you handled things at the diner that day. You didn't fight back or get mean. You stayed strong and dignified. That showed me what real courage looks like. You taught me that standing tall doesn't mean using your fists. You showed me how to be better than the people who try to hurt us. Because of you, I'm staying in school. I'm getting better grades now. My mom says she's proud of how I've changed. You're my hero, Mr. Reynolds. Not because you fought in Vietnam, though that's important too. You're my hero because you show up every day with kindness and respect, even when people don't deserve it. I don't care what anyone says about you. I know who you really are. Your friend, Deshawn." Jack's voice cracked on the last words. He blinked rapidly, but tears still welled in his eyes. His hands trembled as he lowered the letter to his lap. Deshawn leaned forward. "I meant every word, sir." Jack pressed his lips together, trying to maintain composure. "Thank you, son," he managed to say. "This means more than you know." "You can't give up," Deshawn insisted. "If you do, then the bullies win, and you taught me that we can't let that happen." A warm feeling spread through Jack's chest, something he hadn't felt since Earl's lies had started circulating. It was hope, he realized. Hope that maybe his life hadn't been wasted after all. That even if the whole town turned against him, he'd made a real difference in this young man's life. "You're right," Jack said, sitting up straighter. "We can't let them win." Deshawn's face broke into a wide smile. "Does this mean you'll start coming outside again? Because I could really use help with my math homework." Jack actually chuckled, the sound surprising him. "Yes, I suppose it does." They spent the next hour working through Deshawn's algebra problems at the kitchen table. The simple act of helping someone else lifted Jack's spirits more than he could have imagined. When Michael came home from running errands, he found them sharing cookies and discussing Deshawn's upcoming history test. After Deshawn left for dinner, Michael noticed the change in his father's demeanor. "You seem different," he observed, picking up the letter that still lay on the coffee table. "That boy reminded me of something important," Jack said. "Even when everything seems dark, we can still be a light for others." Michael read the letter, his expression softening. "He's right, you know, about all of it." That evening, while Jack rested in his room, Michael sat at his laptop in the kitchen. His fingers flew across the keyboard as he accessed government databases and military archives. Hours passed as he dug deeper, following leads and cross-referencing dates. Just before midnight, he found what he was looking for. His triumphant "yes" echoed through the quiet house. "Dad," he called out, his voice urgent with excitement. "Dad, come here!" Jack appeared in the doorway, tying his robe. "What is it?" Michael's eyes gleamed in the laptop's blue light. "I've found your original service records. The real ones. They prove everything. Your honorable discharge, your Bronze Star, all of it. We can expose Earl's lies." Jack moved closer, peering at the screen. For the first time in days, real hope flickered in his eyes. Deshawn's letter had rekindled his faith in himself. And now, with proof of his service in hand, he could reclaim his honor. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead in the town library's research room. Michael Reynolds sat at a large wooden table, surrounded by stacks of yellowed military records and old newspapers. His jacket was draped over a chair, his sleeves rolled up as he worked. Around him, a small group of dedicated townspeople helped sort through documents. Sarah Miller, the town librarian, pushed her glasses up her nose as she carefully turned brittle pages. "Look at this," she said, sliding a document toward Michael. "It's a list of Bronze Star recipients from your father's unit." Michael leaned forward, his eyes scanning the names. His finger stopped at one entry. Reynolds, Jack M. His heart quickened. This is it. This is the first piece. Tom Parker, a retired history teacher who'd known Jack for decades, shuffled through another stack. "I've got something here, too." He held up a faded newspaper clipping from 1969. "Local soldier honored for valor in Vietnam." Jack's young face stared back from the grainy photo. "Keep digging," Michael encouraged, his voice steady but urgent. "Earl's lies have to be buried somewhere in these records." The afternoon light slanted through tall windows as they worked. Betty Thompson, who'd served coffee to Jack at the diner for 20 years, arrived with sandwiches and fresh coffee for everyone. "You all need to keep your strength up," she said, her eyes bright with determination. Michael thanked her with a tired smile. He'd been at this for days now, searching through every available record. The truth had to be here somewhere. "Hold on," called Richard Martinez, a young veteran who'd insisted on helping. He carefully extracted a document from a manila envelope. "This is big." His hands trembled slightly as he read. "It's the official Bronze Star citation. Details your father's actions under heavy fire. He saved 3 men from his unit." Michael stood, moving quickly to Richard's side. The document was official, bearing the Army seal and proper signatures. His eyes moved over the words, absorbing every detail of his father's bravery. Sarah brought over another folder. "I found his discharge papers. Honorable discharge, with commendations." She spread the documents on the table. "Everything's here, Michael. Everything we need." Tom walked over, adjusting his reading glasses. "Look at these performance reviews from his commanding officer." He pointed to specific lines. "Outstanding leadership. Unwavering courage. Highest moral character." Michael's throat tightened as he read. He'd always known his father was a hero, but seeing it documented in black and white stirred something deep inside him. Betty wiped tears from her eyes. "That Earl Tanner," she said, her voice sharp with anger. "Spreading those awful lies about your daddy. Well, this'll show him. There's more. Richard called out, pulling another document from the stack. Letters of recommendation from his unit commander. Citations for additional medals. He looked up at Michael. Your father wasn't just good, sir. He was exceptional. The group gathered around the table, laying out the evidence piece by piece. Military records, newspaper clippings, commendations, and photographs built a clear picture of Jack Reynolds' honorable service. Sarah organized the documents carefully. I'll make certified copies of everything, she said. No one will be able to question their authenticity. Michael stood back, taking in the scene. These people, who had known his father for years, had given up their afternoon to help uncover the truth. Their dedication moved him deeply. Your father, Tom said quietly, standing beside Michael. He never talked about any of this, did he? Michael shook his head. No. He kept his medals in a box in the closet, never displayed them. That's Jack. Betty nodded. Always humble. Too humble, maybe. Richard finished organizing the last of the documents into a neat pile. Sir, he said to Michael, these records tell the story of a true hero. Your father served with distinction and honor. There's not a single black mark anywhere. Michael gathered the documents carefully, placing them in his briefcase. His hands moved reverently over the papers that proved what he'd always known about his father. Thank you, he said, looking at each person in turn. All of you. This means more than you know. They left the library together, stepping into the late afternoon sunlight. Michael drove home quickly, the briefcase secure on the passenger seat beside him. He found Jack sitting in the kitchen, staring out the window at the backyard where he'd taught Michael to throw a baseball so many years ago. His father looked tired, older somehow, the weight of recent events visible in the slump of his shoulders. Michael set his briefcase on the table and opened it. He lifted out the documents, holding them carefully in his hands. Dad, he said, his voice strong and clear. We can clear your name. The community center buzzed with nervous energy. Metal folding chairs creaked under the weight of what seemed like half the town. Late afternoon sunlight filtered through dusty windows, casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floor. The air felt thick with tension. Earl Tanner stood at the podium, his chest puffed out with misplaced confidence. He held up a manila folder stuffed with papers, waving it like a victory flag. His voice boomed through the room's cheap speakers. I've got proof right here, folks, Earl declared, slapping the folder against the wooden podium. Official documents that'll show you once and for all what kind of man Jack Reynolds really is. He pulled out several papers, their crisp whiteness suggesting they were newer than they should have been. These records show what some of us knew all along, that Jack Reynolds ain't the hero he pretends to be. Jack sat in the back row, his weathered hands clasped tightly in his lap. His face remained calm, but those who knew him well could see the hurt in his eyes. Deshawn sat beside him, occasionally glancing up at the old veteran with worried eyes. Earl began reading from his papers, his voice dripping with satisfaction. According to these military records, Jack Reynolds was discharged under dishonorable conditions for cowardice in the face of... That's enough. Michael's voice cut through the room like a knife through butter. He stood up from his seat in the middle of the crowd, his presence commanding immediate attention. Unlike his usual casual attire, today he wore his official Department of Homeland Security blazer, his credentials visible on his chest. Mr. Tanner, Michael said, his tone measured but firm. I believe you've had your say. Now it's time for the truth. He walked deliberately to the front of the room, carrying his own leather briefcase. The click of his dress shoes echoed in the sudden silence. Earl's smile faltered slightly, but he held his ground. This is the truth, he insisted, shaking his papers. Michael reached the podium and placed his briefcase on it. No, Mr. Tanner. Those are forgeries, and I suspect you know that. He opened his briefcase and removed a thick folder stamped with official government seals. These, however, are the genuine military records of Jack Reynolds, authenticated by the Department of Defense. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Earl's face began to redden. Ladies and gentlemen, Michael continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the room, I'd like to read you the actual record of Jack Reynolds' service. He opened the folder and began reading. On the 15th of April 1968, Sergeant Jack Reynolds demonstrated exceptional valor when his unit came under heavy enemy fire in Quang Tri Province. As Michael read, the room grew increasingly still. He described how Jack had carried 2 wounded men to safety under intense fire, then returned to hold off the enemy while medical evacuation arrived. The citation detailed his unwavering courage and selfless dedication to his fellow soldiers. For these actions, Michael concluded, Sergeant Jack Reynolds was awarded the Bronze Star with Valor device. He held up the official citation, its gold seal catching the light. This medal is one of our nation's highest honors for heroism in combat. Gasps and whispers filled the room. Several veterans in attendance stood up, their faces showing a mixture of respect and anger at how Jack had been treated. Mrs. Henderson, who had been one of the first to believe Earl's lies, dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Earl's face had gone from red to pale. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he tried to maintain his composure. "Those could be fake too," he stammered, but his voice lacked conviction. "These documents," Michael replied calmly, "bear the official seals of the United States military and have been verified by multiple sources." He turned to address the crowd. "I've also brought statements from 3 members of my father's unit, all confirming his heroic actions." People began turning in their seats to look at Jack, who remained seated, his expression humble but no longer bearing the weight of shame. Deshawn beamed up at him with pride. Earl started gathering his papers with trembling hands. The falsified documents slipped from his grasp, scattering across the floor. Nobody moved to help him pick them up. "Furthermore," Michael added, his voice taking on an edge of authority, "forging military documents is a federal offense. Something to consider, Mr. Tanner." The crowd erupted in a mixture of angry mutters and disappointed headshakes directed at Earl. The man who had seemed so powerful just minutes ago now looked small and defeated. Pastor Williams stood up from his seat in the front row. "I believe we owe Jack Reynolds an apology," he announced, his voice thick with emotion. "And perhaps we all need to examine why we were so quick to believe the worst about a man who has served this community with nothing but dignity for decades." Earl couldn't take it anymore. He abandoned his scattered papers and practically ran toward the exit, pushing past several people in his haste to escape. The door slammed behind him, the sound echoing through the room like final punctuation to his disgrace. As if a dam had broken, people began moving toward Jack. Mrs. Henderson reached him first, tears streaming down her face as she hugged him. "I'm so sorry, Jack," she sobbed. "We should have known better." Others followed, the hardware store owner who had refused to serve him, neighbors who had turned away, friends who had doubted. They surrounded Jack with apologies, handshakes, and embraces. Through it all, Jack maintained his characteristic dignity, accepting their words with quiet grace. Deshawn stayed right by Jack's side, grinning proudly. "I knew you were a hero all along, Mr. Reynolds," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. Michael watched from the podium, a small smile playing at his lips, as he saw his father finally receiving the respect and recognition he deserved. The afternoon sun had shifted, and now it seemed to shine directly on Jack, as if heaven itself was confirming his vindication. The crowd around Jack continued to grow, with people sharing memories of his kindness over the years and expressing their shame at having doubted him. The community center, which had so recently been filled with tension and accusations, now hummed with the warm energy of reconciliation and restored honor. The bell above Helen's diner chimed as Jack Reynolds pushed open the heavy glass door, the familiar scent of coffee and fresh-baked pie wrapped around him like a warm blanket. Sunlight streamed through the windows, catching the chrome trim of the booths and making them sparkle. It was different now. Everything was different. Mrs. Helen herself bustled out from behind the counter, her gray hair tucked neatly under a hairnet, and her weathered face creased with a genuine smile. "Jack Reynolds, you get yourself in here right this minute." She wrapped him in a tight hug, something she'd never done before in all his years as a customer. The diner was packed, every booth and counter seat filled with familiar faces from town. Some stood as he entered, offering handshakes and gentle pats on the back. The warmth in their eyes replaced the cold stares of recent weeks. Michael followed close behind his father, sharing proud looks with the gathered crowd. They'd worked together to arrange this surprise gathering, a way to reclaim this space that had once been tainted by cruelty. "Your usual booth is waiting, Jack," Helen said, gesturing to his favorite spot by the window. The same booth where Earl had humiliated him felt different now, transformed by the presence of friendly faces and warm hearts. Deshawn sat in the front row of chairs they'd set up near Jack's booth, practically bouncing with excitement. The teenager wore his best button-down shirt, and his mother sat beside him, beaming with pride at the relationship that had formed between her son and the veteran. As Jack made his way to the booth, people reached out to touch his shoulder, or murmur words of support. The pastor from First Baptist stood nearby, nodding in approval. Even gruff old Tom from the hardware store had shown up, his usual scowl replaced by an apologetic smile. The diner grew quiet as Jack settled into his spot. Someone had placed his favorite coffee mug, the blue one with the chip on the handle, right where he always liked it. Steam rose from the fresh-poured coffee inside. "I guess I should say something," Jack began, his voice soft but steady. He cleared his throat, looking around at the faces of his neighbors. "This diner, well, it's been my morning spot for 20 years. Even after Marie passed, it was the place I could come and feel at home." He paused, taking a sip of coffee to steady himself. Michael stood nearby, offering silent support. When everything happened with Earl, it wasn't just the slap that hurt. It was seeing doubt in the eyes of people I'd known for decades. People who'd sat right here with me, shared coffee and conversation. Jack's words carried no bitterness, only honest reflection. Deshaun leaned forward in his chair, hanging on every word. The boy's presence reminded Jack of why this moment mattered so much. "But you all chose truth over lies," Jack continued. "You looked deeper than rumors and showed me what community really means." He gestured to the gathering. "This, right here, this is what I fought for in Vietnam. Not for medals or recognition, but for moments like this, where people can come together, admit when they're wrong, and choose to stand up for what's right." Helen dabbed at her eyes with her apron. Several others in the crowd sniffled quietly. "I want to thank you all," Jack said, his voice growing stronger. "Not just for clearing my name, but for showing Deshaun and other young folks that character still matters in this town. That truth wins out over lies, and that we're stronger when we stand together." Deshaun's face lit up at the mention of his name. The teenager had become a symbol of hope in their small town, proof that bridges could be built across generations and differences. The gathered crowd broke into applause, genuine and heartfelt. Mrs. Helen started bringing out slices of her famous apple pie, Jack's favorite, setting them on tables with generous scoops of vanilla ice cream. Michael slid into the booth across from his father, just like he used to do as a boy. The familiar red vinyl seats squeaked beneath them, a homey sound that brought comfort rather than anxiety now. "You did good, Dad," Michael said, picking up his fork. "Really good." Jack smiled, watching the diner fill with conversation and laughter. The clink of coffee cups and the scrape of forks against plates created a symphony of normal life restored. Where silence had once ruled after Earl's cruelty, now warm chatter and genuine laughter echoed off the walls. Deshaun bounded over to their booth, unable to contain his excitement any longer. "That was amazing, Mr. Reynolds," he exclaimed. "Just like you taught me, standing tall and speaking truth." Jack chuckled, ruffling the boy's hair. "You helped make it happen, son. Your letter meant more than you know." The afternoon sun painted long shadows through the windows as father and son shared their pie. Each bite tasted of victory, not over Earl, but over the darkness that had threatened to divide their community. The diner hummed with life and warmth, transformed from a place of shame into a symbol of redemption. Michael caught his father's eye across the table and grinned. "Just like old times?" he asked, gesturing at their pie-laden plates. Jack nodded, savoring the moment. Their laughter joined the chorus of joy filling the diner, washing away the last echoes of that gray November morning when everything had changed. This was how it should be. Community restored, faith renewed, and honor upheld, not through force, but through the quiet strength of truth and dignity. The morning sun cast long shadows across Main Street as Earl Tanner stomped out of the First National Bank, clutching a cardboard box of personal items from his now empty office. His face was red with anger and shame, his cheap suit wrinkled from sitting in his chair all night, trying to figure out how it had all gone so wrong. He spotted his old friend Bill Peterson across the street and raised his hand in greeting. Bill quickly turned away, suddenly very interested in the hardware store window display. Earl's hand dropped like a stone. The same scene repeated itself as he made his way down the street. Martha from the bakery flipped her open sign to closed when she saw him coming. Tom Wilson, who used to share drinks with him every Friday night, crossed to the other side of the street, avoiding eye contact. "Cowards! All of you!" Earl shouted, his voice cracking. "You'll see! You'll all see!" But nobody seemed to care anymore. His words echoed off empty sidewalks and closed doors. The power he'd once wielded through fear and manipulation had evaporated like morning dew. At the corner cafe, where he'd held court so many mornings spreading his poison about Jack Reynolds, the usual crowd of regulars stared into their coffee cups as he passed. Nobody offered him a seat. Nobody even looked up. 20 years? He snarled at them through the window. 20 years I've known some of you, and this is how you treat me? An elderly woman walking her small dog crossed the street to avoid him. The dog growled softly as it passed. Earl's hand shook as he loaded the last box into his rusty pickup truck. Decades of building his reputation, of making people fear him, of being somebody in this town, all gone because of Jack Reynolds and his fancy government son. He slammed the truck door so hard the window rattled. "This town never appreciated me anyway," he muttered, jamming the key into the ignition. "Bunch of weak-minded sheep." As he gunned the engine, he caught sight of Jack Reynolds standing quietly on the sidewalk near Helen's diner. The old veteran's posture was straight and dignified, his eyes calm and steady as they met Earl's furious glare. "What are you looking at, old man?" Earl shouted through his open window. "Come to gloat?" Jack simply stood there, hands in the pockets of his army jacket, saying nothing. "You think you've won something here?" Earl's voice rose higher, nearly breaking. "You and your high and mighty son with his government connections? You're nothing. You hear me? Nothing." A few people had stopped to watch, but not to support Earl as they once might have. Instead, they moved closer to Jack, standing with him in silent solidarity. Earl's truck lurched forward, tires squealing on the asphalt. He stuck his head out the window one last time. "This town's dead anyway. Dead and boring and worthless, just like you." But his words had lost their sting. They fell flat in the morning air, hollow and meaningless. Jack watched as Earl's truck fishtailed around the corner, spewing gravel. Behind him, Helen emerged from her diner and touched his arm gently. "You okay, Jack?" she asked softly. Jack nodded, his eyes still on the disappearing truck. "You know, Helen," he said quietly, "I remember when Earl was just a kid, always angry about something, always trying to make himself bigger by making others feel smaller." "Some people never grow up," Helen replied. "No," Jack agreed. "And that's what makes it sad. All these years, he could have used his energy to build people up instead of tearing them down. Could have made friends instead of enemies. Could have found real strength instead of false power." They could still hear the roar of Earl's truck engine in the distance. Growing fainter with each passing second, the sound of his departure seemed to lift a weight from the town itself, like a dark cloud finally breaking. "The terrible thing about hate," Jack continued, "is that it hurts the person carrying it more than anyone else. Earl's been carrying that burden so long, he doesn't know how to put it down." A small crowd had gathered now, watching Earl's truck disappear over the hill at the edge of town. Someone started to make a joke, but Jack raised his hand slightly. "No," he said softly. "Don't mock him. That's his way, not ours." Deshawn, who had come to stand beside Jack, looked up at him. "But after everything he did to you, Mr. Reynolds, all the lies he told." Jack placed a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. "Hatred is like a hot coal, son. You can throw it at someone else, but you're the one who gets burned holding it." The truck was just a dot now on the horizon. Jack watched it until it vanished completely, then sighed deeply. "I pity him," he murmured, "but I won't hate him." The morning breeze stirred the American flag hanging outside the post office. Around Jack, the town was coming alive with the usual morning bustle. Shops opening, people greeting each other, life moving forward. Earl's departure marked not an ending, but a return to something better, something truer. Helen touched Jack's arm again. "Come on," she said warmly. "Your coffee's getting cold." Jack nodded, taking one last look at the empty horizon where Earl's truck had disappeared. Then he turned away, following Helen back into the diner where his usual booth waited, leaving the bitterness of the past behind with the dust of Earl's departing wheels. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant streaks of orange and purple as Jack and Michael sat on the weathered front porch of their family home. The old wooden swing creaked gently as they rocked back and forth, sharing a comfortable silence. The evening air was crisp with the promise of winter, and the last golden rays caught the few remaining leaves clinging to the maple tree in the front yard. Jack wrapped his hands around a steaming mug of coffee, breathing in its familiar comfort. His wedding ring caught the fading light, and a gentle smile crossed his weathered face. "Your mother always loved this time of day," he said softly. "She'd sit right here, watching the sunset, telling me how God painted the sky just for us." Michael nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "I remember. She'd make hot chocolate for me, and we'd count the stars as they came out." He paused, looking at the empty space on the swing where his mother used to sit. "She'd be proud of how you handled everything, Dad. Standing firm without letting bitterness take root. That was always her way, too." Jack's eyes grew distant, remembering. Sarah had more grace in her little finger than most folks have in their whole body. When things got rough these past weeks, I'd ask myself what she would do. He took a slow sip of coffee. "She always said love was like water. It finds a way through the hardest stone if you give it time." The crickets began their evening chorus as Michael shifted in his seat. "You know, Dad, watching you these past weeks, how you faced Earl's cruelty with dignity, how you helped Deshawn when you were hurting yourself, it reminded me of all the lessons you and Mom taught me about real strength." A cool breeze rustled through the yard, carrying the scent of fallen leaves. Jack pulled his jacket closer. "Sometimes I wondered if I was being a fool, taking the high road, especially after that day in the diner. That's actually why I came home when I did," Michael said, his voice growing serious. "I needed to tell you something important, but then everything with Earl happened." He turned to face his father. "Dad, I've been appointed as the new head of Homeland Security." Jack's eyes widened slightly, but then a knowing smile crossed his face. "I figured it was something big. You've been carrying yourself different lately. More weight on your shoulders." Michael chuckled softly. "I could have used my position to crush Earl like a bug. One phone call, and his life would have been turned upside down." He shook his head. "But then I thought about what you always taught me. That true power isn't about force, it's about wisdom and compassion." "Your mother would say the same thing." Jack nodded, his voice thick with emotion. "You know what's funny?" Michael continued, watching the last rays of sunlight fade from the horizon. "I'm supposed to be responsible for the security of our entire nation now, but sitting here, I realize my greatest pride isn't my title or position." He turned to his father, eyes shining. "It's being your son, carrying forward the legacy of honor and integrity you built." Jack set his coffee mug down on the small table beside the swing. The porch light flickered on automatically, casting a warm glow around them. "I've been thinking about legacy lately," he said. "When Earl was spreading those lies, I worried I'd leave behind nothing but shame. But watching you stand up for what's right, seeing how you've grown into a man of principle," his voice wavered slightly, "well, that's worth more than all the medals in the world." The first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. From somewhere down the street came the sound of children's laughter and a dog barking, the peaceful sounds of their small town settling into evening wrapped around them like a familiar blanket. Michael reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn photograph. Jack, Sarah, and himself as a young boy, all smiling on this very porch. "Remember this day?" he asked, passing it to his father. Jack's fingers trembled slightly as he took the photo. "Your 10th birthday! Your mother had just baked that chocolate cake you love so much." He traced Sarah's smile with his finger. "She always said you'd do great things, but that your greatest achievement would be your heart." "She was right about so many things," Michael said softly. "About love being stronger than hate. About dignity being better than revenge." He looked at his father. "About you being the best example a son could ask for." The night had fully settled in now, the chirping crickets accompanied by a chorus of frogs from the nearby creek. Jack felt a deep peace settle over him, the kind of peace that comes from knowing that, despite life's storms, love and truth had prevailed. He turned to his son, reaching out to clasp his hand firmly. His voice was steady and sure as he said, "You're the best thing I ever brought into this world." The morning sun streamed through the diner's wide windows, casting warm squares of light across the checkered floor. The familiar aroma of coffee and fresh-baked pie filled the air, mingling with the cheerful buzz of conversation. Jack Reynolds sat in his usual booth, his weathered hands wrapped around a steaming coffee mug. Deshawn Miller navigated between tables with careful steps, balancing a fresh pot of coffee. His face lit up with pride as he approached Jack's booth. "Need a refill, Mr. Reynolds?" he asked, already tilting the pot. "Thank you, son," Jack replied softly, sliding his cup closer. The teenager poured with steady hands, just as Jack had taught him weeks ago when the diner's owner had offered Deshaun his first part-time job. Around them, the diner hummed with life. At the counter, Mrs. Peterson chatted with the town librarian about the Veterans History Project they were organizing. Near the window, Tom from the hardware store shared breakfast with Bill, the auto mechanic who'd once turned his back on Jack. Now they waved warmly as they caught his eye. "Hey, Mr. Reynolds," Deshaun said, sliding into the booth's opposite seat during his break. "I got an A on that history paper about Vietnam. The one you helped me with?" Jack's eyes crinkled with genuine pleasure. "That's excellent work, Deshaun. Your mother must be proud." "She is," Deshaun beamed. "She says since I started hanging around you, my grades have gotten way better. And," he lowered his voice, "those guys who used to bother me, they don't anymore. Not since they saw how you handled everything with dignity." The bell above the door chimed as more customers entered. Jack noticed how naturally people nodded hello, how easily smiles came now. The tension that had gripped the town for so long had melted away like morning frost in sunshine. Sarah, the waitress who'd witnessed that terrible slap months ago, stopped by their table. "Your usual breakfast, Jack? Toast extra crispy?" "That'd be wonderful, Sarah. And maybe a slice of apple pie to share with my young friend here. Coming right up." She patted his shoulder as she left, a gesture that would have been unthinkable during those dark days when rumors poisoned the town against him. Through the window, Jack watched people strolling down Main Street. The hardware store where he'd once heard whispered insults now displayed a Veterans Welcome sign in the window. The church across the street had started a weekly support group for military families, inspired by his story. Deshaun gathered empty cups from nearby tables, then paused. "Mr. Reynolds, remember when you told me that standing tall doesn't mean standing alone?" Jack nodded, remembering their conversations during those afternoon mentoring sessions on his porch. "Well, I got picked for student council president," Deshaun continued, pride mixing with slight embarrassment. "First black student to ever do it. Some kids tried to say mean things, but I remembered what you taught me about dignity, about not letting hate make you bitter." Jack reached across the table and squeezed the boy's shoulder. "You're going to do great things, Deshaun. You already are." The morning crowd grew, filling every booth and counter seat. Jack noticed how the diner had become more than just a place to eat. It was where the community came together, where old wounds healed through shared meals and quiet conversations. Mr. Chen from the pharmacy waved as he entered, heading straight for Jack's booth. "Good morning, Jack. Those vitamins you asked about came in. I'll set them aside for you." "Much appreciated," Jack replied, remembering how the same man had once refused to meet his eyes. The diner's owner, Betty, emerged from the kitchen with a fresh pie. She set it on the counter with flourish, calling out, "Jack Reynolds, this one's your wife's recipe. Found it in that community cookbook she put together years ago. Thought it was time to bring it back." Jack felt his throat tighten with emotion. Mary would have loved seeing the diner like this, full of friendship and warmth. He could almost hear her laugh, see her smile, and the way the morning light danced across the tabletop. A group of veterans from the next town over sat at the counter, their Vietnam service caps proudly displayed. They'd started coming regularly after hearing about Jack's story, finding in him a quiet leader who understood their struggles. Deshaun returned with the pie, setting 2 plates down. "Mrs. Betty says this one's on the house." He slid back into the booth, his break not quite over. "You know, my mom says you're like the grandfather I never had." Jack smiled, touched by the boy's words. Around them, the diner continued its morning dance of coffee cups and conversation. Through the window, he could see the town awakening to another day, but it was different now. The shadows of prejudice had lifted, replaced by understanding and respect. A young mother at the next table bounced a baby on her knee, smiling at Jack. "My husband's deployed," she said. "Being able to come here, seeing how the town supports its veterans now, it helps." Jack nodded, understanding. The diner had become a sanctuary of sorts, a place where people found strength and community. Where a slap meant to break him had instead broken down walls between neighbors. He sipped his coffee, watching Deshaun head back to work with confident steps. The boy moved between tables with the same quiet dignity Jack had taught him, head held high, spirit unbroken. The morning sun climbed higher, filling the diner with golden light. Jack sat surrounded by the warmth of friendship and respect, his coffee cup a familiar comfort in his hands. Once broken, he now sat unshaken, the veteran, whose quiet strength changed a town forever. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Jack Reynolds, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please, don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.